Welcome to this video. This is a continuation of cascading style sheets, kind of an introduction. And in this particular video, we're going to be talking about what the anatomy of a style is. In other words, how do we create the style? How do we control the particular elements of our HTML page? And what kinds of properties are there that we can affect? The first thing that we need to understand is that CSS associates style rules. So the rule is what an individual style element here is called. That's what's pictured here, would be a rule, and it associates them with particular HTML elements. This is done with a combination of things called a selector and a declaration. The selector, as is highlighted in the upper left, is the element, the HTML element that's going to be affected. In this case, there are different types of elements. The one that is shown in this picture is a P, which means it is going to be affecting all of the paragraph styles. It matches the particular tag that's used in HTML, but minus the little angular brackets on either side. That is our selector. So this indicates it's going to affect the paragraph style. Then there's the declaration. The declaration occurs within curly brackets, and there can be any number of rules that are associated with the particular selector element. So we have this declaration, we have font family, and it's saying that the font will then be Arial. That is the declaration. We could actually add to this if we wanted to. Things like color would be another declaration. Font size would be another declaration, and they would all be within the same curly brackets that affect the one paragraph selector in this case. Continuing with that, now that we have a selector and a declaration, within the declaration we have properties which affect how the elements are displayed using certain values. So in this particular case, the properties are font family and color. So the properties are what is defined by CSS and saying that these are the selection of properties that we have available to us. The list of properties is really extensive. So let's go take a look at W3 Schools. And there's a list of property groups because there is just a tremendous amount of properties that can be affected, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can always reference them using something like W3 Schools. For example, if we go to color, here are a list of properties that can be used. There, of course, is color, opacity, background, background attachment. These are background and border properties, and so on. You can see that this list is extensive. And these are the properties that we are, I hate to say the word limited because there are so many of them, but these are the properties that are defined for us that we can use to reshape the presentation of our HTML using CSS. The second half of the declaration is the value. This is how the element itself is going to be changed. So for example, the font family, which is the property, is being given the value of Arial. So it is saying use the font family of Arial. Make, in this particular case, H1s, H2s, and H3s all use the font family of Arial. Also, property of color has been given the value of FFF200. It's a hex number, which is a commonly used way of finding web colors that expands our list beyond the basics. You can also use, for values specifically related to color, you can use values like white, black, pink, blue, and so on, but that really limits the options. If you want to truly customize your site, you can use these hex values. To create a hex value, I've moved over into Photoshop. And to show you how simple it is, you can just create a color. I happen to have a blue color selected here. If I click on this box and it opens my color picker, it gives me HSB, lab, CMYK, RGB, and my hex value. this is the value that I need for the web. So this shows you that you can use virtually infinite color selections. Just by using the color picker, you can change the colors that you're using. So that was a little side step, but to demonstrate how we use particular color values. So the values and the properties work together to form a declaration that work to define a selector. Now there are different types of selectors. This is also important to understand because CSS selectors are what are allowing us to target specific elements in our HTML document. In the previous examples we saw like heading 1s and paragraphs were some of our examples. Those were what are referred to as element or tag selectors because it's selecting a particular core HTML semantic markup element or tag within the HTML. The other type is referred to as class, and yet another is referred to as an ID style, and we'll go over each of these in a bit more detail. The first is our element or tag selector. This is the most simple to use and the broadest to use, and this is why semantic markup came into play in HTML. For example, when I asked you to include semantic markup of header, nav, main, and footer in your HTML pages, it doesn't really do anything to show up in your page, but you can now alter those things simply by using an element selector within your CSS. In the example that's shown on this page, we are going to affect all of the H1s that this style sheet will be associated with. So the H1s, that is our element or tag selector. It could be a P, it could be a table, it could be nav, it could be main, it could be header. Any of those things that already exist within HTML are element selectors. And notice how they are created. They are simply the content of the element or tag in our HTML without the angled brackets. The second type is referred to as a class selector. What a class selector is, and it's probably the next broadest use of a style type or a selector to the element selector that we just saw, because what this does is it can match an element whose class attribute, and I'll show you what that is, has the value that matches the one specified after a period. These can be applied to virtually any attribute in our HTML. For example, this dot align left, and you'll notice that align left is not an element in HTML. It's not like a nav or an H1. This is a word that we've made up to describe something. Another thing to note, there are no spaces. You can use dashes, or you can use what's referred to as camel case, where in this case I could use a capital A in a line and a capital L in left, but it would all still be sandwiched together as one word. Then it can be applied to anything where I say class equals align left. The period indicates in our CSS that this is a class selector. At the bottom, I've indicated here that this is going to be applied to a paragraph style using the word class equals, and then in quotation marks, align left. Let's take a look at this in a Dreamweaver document that I have applied within my biography site, and I'm going to scroll down, and I have created a paragraph using a class style called feature. So here it is. I've done paragraph, class equals feature, and if I go over to my style sheet, here it is, located at the bottom. It has a period at the front. The period indicates that it is a class style, and then we give it a name, and then we define it the same way we would any other style, and it can be applied to anything. So in this case, I have made the feature color and the text color turn into this dark teal color, and I've changed the line height, which is the element that determines the spacing between lines. So think about it like single or double spacing. So let's go to our about. So I have P class equals feature. I could apply it to my H3 as well, or to a line item. So let's just go down and apply it here within my line item, in which case I'm going to do a space, type the word class. In this case, because I've got a style sheet that's attached with it, it automatically will come up in my list, or I can type it in. I type in just the word feature. Notice no period, because the period says, hey, it's a class style, but I've said in the HTML, class equals feature. It can be applied to anything. So let's just save this and take a look in a browser. So in this case, I applied the style. It's hard to tell on this, but these paragraphs right here are the ones that had the class feature added to it. So they're kind of that teal color. It's the same teal color as up in our heading 1, but it's applied to the text. I also applied that feature to just the first element in my ordered list. So you can see it's kind of teal, whereas everything else is black. So classes can be added to virtually anything, but you just simply identify it by using, let's go back, the word class equals feature, and in the style sheet it has a period in front of it saying that indicates that it's a class. So let's do one more thing. We have what's referred to as an ID selector. Now an ID selector is really similar to a class selector. The difference is IDs are related to an element on a page that you only want to use once. The example that I provide here is what is referred to as a wrapper. A wrapper is a common term that's been adopted that wraps around your entire website. So, for example, that you would want it to center on your page. We'll go ahead and create an example here in a second. The wrapper is indicated that it is an ID selector because it has the hashtag or the pound symbol in front of it. So like the class style with the period, an ID selector uses the hashtag or pound sign in front of the name. And similar again to the class style, you can create the name of this and it can be applied to any number of things, but it is usually used once and only once on your web page. It is indicated in your code on the HTML page by the HTML selector saying that it's an ID style equals and then just the name of what it is. So the wrapper and the wrapper. ID equals the hashtag. So let's go test this out in our biography site. I am going to go into my style sheet and I'm going to create a brand new style. I'm going to put it up near the top of my page. I'm going to give it the hashtag and the name wrapper because I want to apply this as an ID style. So I'm going to open my style and close it. That's the curly brackets that hold the declaration. And now I need to give it some properties and values. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a width. I'm going to say it'll be 960 pixels. And I'm going to give it a background color. In this case, I'm just going to make my background color white, which is 3 Fs if you want to use the hex number. And so now I'm saying that the width is 960 pixels and the background color is white. I'm going to save my style sheet, but I need to go and apply it first. So I'm going to go to my index page. I have my style sheet already applied. And in this case, I want it to go, the wrapper, I want it to go right inside my body tag. And I'm going to create a div. And it's an ID, so I'm going to type in the word ID. And it's going to find wrapper because I just created it. close up that tag, and I need to close the tag at the very bottom right before the closing body tag because I want it to wrap around everything in my site. So that's my div for my wrapper that's using an ID style. Let's save this and go look at it in the browser and see what it does. So now here is my white wrapper div tag that goes around the content of my website. Notice my background is still kind of this yellowy color. The background of the wrapper is white, and it's used only once on the page, whereas my class styles can be used multiple times on the page. So that's how we create an ID style versus a class style and how they're used. Let's go back to our PowerPoint, and we've got a couple more things to look at. So what happens next is we have the opportunity to group our selectors. For example, if we know we want to change several elements in our HTML to have the same style attributes, we can change them all at once by grouping our selectors. In this example, what I've done is I am going to use my element selector of H1, H2, and H3, and I want to tell them that they all are supposed to use the font family of Arial, Helvetica, or sans serif. So what this does is I'm saying there's an H1 and I put a comma after it saying, okay, affect the H1, comma, then affect the H2, comma, and also the H3s. So in this case, all of my H1s, 2s, and 3s are going to have the same font family. Let's go take a look at the style sheet that I created, and you'll see that I did just that. So here is an H1, an H2, and an H3, all separated with a comma. I just put them on separate lines instead of all in a row. In between my curly brackets, I've said they are all going to use the font family of Bubblegum Sans. But then I went on, so that is where I have grouped them, and I said they're all going to use the same font, but I don't want them all the same size or all the same color or any number of other characteristics, so I still do those individually. So I can group them if they have some common attributes, like this, in this case, the font, but I can still control them separately, saying make this one have a background color of the dark teal, the text of kind of this gold, the font size is 34, I want this all to be uppercase, and I want it centered on the page. Whereas if you compare that to the H2, the background color is kind of the rusty red. It has the same color of font, but I couldn't group because these two are the same, but my H3s aren't. My H3 is this red color, so I couldn't put the color up here, so it's controlled separately. And each of them has a different font size, so I group only the things that it has in common. So that's how we do group selectors. It's the individual selector that you want to have separated by commas to include them all. And finally, we have what are called complex or compound selectors. This gives us the ability to target really specific elements that fall within one another. So for example, in this case, if I only want to affect the H1s that appear in the header, what I do is I indicate that I'm looking for the element selector of header and the element selector of H1. This is collectively considered one selector because there's no comma in between it. Grouping selectors, there's a comma, meaning each of these things are treated separately. But here it's header space H1. So we're only affecting the H1s and changing their background color. Let's go take a look at this in our CSS style sheet. I have created one here called nav P, meaning that only the paragraphs within the nav are going to be bold and centered. So let's go take a look. So let's go to our index. So it's saying that only the nav will be affected and only the paragraphs within the nav. Will not affect the paragraph that's out here or out here. And what I said it was going to be doing is it was going to be bold and centered. So let's go take a look in our web browser. I'm going to go back to the index, go back out to our Google Chrome, and you'll notice that this is the paragraph. These are what are contained within the nav are those elements, and they are bold and centered. Whereas these paragraphs are left justified and not bold. It's because we use that complex selector that says use nav and P and only change those. So that's the idea of a complex selector. That's all we're going to go over. The book covers this in a lot more detail. You also have access to things like W3 Schools, which is a tremendous resource in understanding each of these if you don't quite get them, because this is a very complicated thing to understand. So we're starting out and we're going to be building on this slowly and keep adding things as we go. That is the anatomy of a style.